So my name is Daniel Leal. I'm an alumni from Columbia University, currently working in sustainable investing in New York. I hope you've had the opportunity to connect with some of the incredible attendees that we've brought here today. So we've heard from various experts in Brazil and internationally about the potential to lead multiple markets, agendas, and solutions for climate change our country holds. However, to meet this potential, investment is essential. Our next panel, Investors' Perspectives, Challenges and Motivations to Invest in Climate in Brazil, will explore the key challenges of mobilizing climate capital for Brazil, the crucial role development banks play in mitigating investment risks, and the contributions of rating agencies to the sustainable investment landscape. With that, I'm pleased to invite our panelists to the stage, Andres Ackerman, Director and Head of Investment Funds at IDB Invest, Catalina Hayata, Head of Latam Private Credit at Macquarie, Jeremy Oppenheim, Managing Partner at Systemic, and Samar Mazyad, Vice President and Senior Analyst at Moody's. And for our moderator, Luciana Ribeiro, Founding Partner at EB Capital and co-founder of the Brazil Climate Summit.
Hello, everyone. Very nice to be here with you. And we have this panel designed so that we had internationals from different regions to talk about investments in Brazil. That was not by chance, that was by design. And Jeremy here at the beginning asked me, what's the success of this event? Showcasing that we have more motivations than challenges to invest in Brazil. But anyway, I would love to start if each one of you could introduce yourself and explain what your institution does and how it's related to Brazil.
So, hello. Andres Ackerman. I work for IDB Invest. IDB Invest is a multilateral development institution focused on Latin America and the Caribbean. We are the private sector arm of the IDB group, present in offices in 26 countries. And Brazil is obviously a very important country for our institution. In our operations, we have three main sectors: infrastructure, corporates, and financial institutions. I lead our investment funds group, investing in private capital, private equity, and private credit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Catalina?
Hello, Catalina Hayata. I am the person leading the private credit investments for Latin America at Macquarie. So just a little bit on Macquarie. We are an Australian financial institution with three different divisions. We have an asset management division that is well known for being like the largest infrastructure asset manager in the world. We have a private equity division, also active on a global basis and very much within the infrastructure sector. And then we have a commodities and global market division. That is the one that I sit within for making these balance sheet private credit investments. And in our division, and I would say broadly speaking across Macquarie, we are very focused on energy transition as part of our investment mandate on a global basis. And I would say that the focus on Latin America is really driven by the resources-rich continent. So we have a lot of interest to continue to play out this energy transition and leverage our expertise to deploy funds into Latin America and specifically Brazil.
Thank you very much. Jeremy?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's fantastic to be here. I'm Jeremy Oppenheim, founder and managing partner at Systemic. And what Systemic does for a living is that we work on the major economic systems, the energy system, the food and land use system, the material system, and finance, to see if we can accelerate the shift to an economy that actually delivers what we need, which is the prosperity that we need on the one hand and the, if you will, the environmental and social integrity that we need on the other. We have a wonderful Brazilian office led by the dynamic Patricia Allen, who one or two of you might know. If anybody doesn't, she's sitting here at the front. Right? Everybody knows Patricia. And we have been working on the ecological transformation plan, not just with the Brazilian government, but with many, many different stakeholders, public and private and civil society, to see how Brazil can achieve this very clear objective of accelerating growth, of widening, if you will, and broadening prosperity across the country, right? And at the same time doing so in a way that plays to Brazil's great strengths as a, if you will, natural capital and clean energy superpower. So how do we get that to happen? And it's brilliant to be here.
Thank you, Jeremy. Samar?
Yes, thank you. My name is Samar Meziad. I'm a senior analyst at the Moody's Sovereign Risk Group. It's a lot simpler than what everybody talked about here. I rate sovereign debt, so including Brazil. So a rating agency assesses the risk of corporate, sovereigns, structures, everything. And I cover the sovereign, including Brazil. Sovereigns in LATAM, a portfolio of sovereigns in LATAM. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We are going to divide the beginning of our panel in 3 areas. We're going to talk a little bit about opportunities, then we are going to talk about challenges, and then we're going to talk about next steps. And I would like to start with you, Jeremy, on a broader view. You have a global firm, you act in different countries, but you had decided to have a specific focus on Brazil. I would love to understand why, and I would love to understand your view on climate investment opportunities in Brazil right now and the years to come.
Luciana, so thank you. I mean, let me just start with an obvious statement, and this comes from the environmental side and the climate side, which is there is no, if you will, way forward on climate and the big environmental challenges we have globally without a successful, thriving, prosperous Brazil, where these assets are integral, right, to the way in which the economy operates. If we had a rational way of, if you will, valuing the natural capital and the clean energy assets that Brazil has, it would have a dramatically better sovereign rating than it has today, because those assets are ones that are so fundamental, right, to the long-term functioning and health of the world economy. So there is a deep mispricing taking place in capital markets globally because we're not pricing those assets in the right way.
I thought you were my friend, but like clearly you are picking on me now. Well,
I'm definitely your friend.
I wanted to create a dialogue. The dialogue is done.
So that's sort of the starting point, right? From a macro point of view, right? And it's not just an environmental point of view, it's a fundamental view about good economics. If we price, if you will, the real, if you will, value of our natural capital properly. If you drive down from there to, if you will, from macro to micro, what we see in Brazil are an extraordinary set of opportunities. And, you know, the easy version of that is clean energy superpower. Which other major economy, right, has the clean energy matrix that Brazil starts with, right? And it's quite hard to figure out who would come close, right? That ought to be an extraordinary asset in a world that is making a shift, if you will, to a clean energy system. And it ought to create a series of very specific, you know, investment opportunities internationally for companies that want to, if you will, build on that, if you will, energy capability. And that ranges from obviously the multitude of bioenergy and biomaterial plays through to the, if you will, the renewable energy plays, which I think are not yet really scaled in the way that they can in Brazil. I mean, Brazil has every gift of God, as we know, right? Including extraordinary people. You know, there's all of that to play for, and you can go from that level of analysis down to specifics on biosaf and specifics on biogas and specifics on, you know, recycling of, you know, elements of what is quite a wasteful economy at the moment. So you can get right down into the detail, but there's no shortage there. And I'm not going to take more time, but if we if we wanted to, we could spend the next hour dissecting the multitude of opportunities that sit around, if you will, different elements of the nature-based economy, and the way in which, and Patricia would always say to me, Jeremy, you have no idea what the wealth is of the Amazon in terms of both the superfoods and the nutraceuticals and a range of very, very high value, rapidly growing international markets, which could be the basis of huge, if you will, growth opportunities that align what we care about in terms of spreading prosperity and wealth and what we care about in terms of protecting nature for the long term.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And I think with that, I think we brought many different aspects. But let me, from the opportunities you started describing, let me go to Catalina. You guys have been in Brazil for quite a while now. And with the specific focus of energy transition, you have also been studying some of the opportunities in Brazil. Can you tell us a little bit of what's your view on Brazil? What are the things that you are interested on? And
100%. And so it's very funny, actually, because I had a conversation with the head of our asset management division who runs Brazil. And I have to tell you, what you just said is so in line with exactly the reason why we are there, right? It is nature-based. The potential is enormous. The clean energy matrix, it just works. And there is no other comparable country in the world where you have these elements and this richness of nature-based. So I would say that, very much aligned with exactly what you told me is, basically from an asset management perspective, the view of why we are there, right? And so we made an investment in renewable. This is both solar, and wind in Feijão is around 500 megawatts. It was about a 700 million investment. We did it in partnership. We are developing that. So from that perspective, we see the opportunity and we are deploying our capital there. We continue to look for opportunities in clean energy. On my side, more on the commodity and global market side, we are very focused now on renewable alternative fuels, because we also see that there is a massive opportunity, basically just given the natural resources there, for us to come in and put together and finance projects where we can have this in a mass scale. So those are the two areas that we're focused in. And then we can talk a little bit about, the challenges. But as far as the opportunity itself is concerned, hugely bullish on how do we get all of the potential from a macro level, then go down to the project level in order to, work with corporate clients who are interested in the opportunity, go hand in hand, and from our perspective, put in the capital required to make the projects successful, as well as, there's a high level of commodity price risk in any of these ventures related to alternative fuels. So also providing the hedging that can sustain the capital in order to develop the projects.
I like very much to hear how bullish you guys are. We agree very much with you. Andres, IDB has been a partner for the region for a long time. And you are very active on climate. You are very active on nature-based solutions. You are, as an institution as well, very active on creating mechanisms that can solve some of our problems, especially related to currency. Can you tell us a little bit of things that IDB is doing in the country, and how do you see the country evolving?
Sure. And let me just say first, I agree with everything that was said here. The opportunity is tremendous. And there's a mismatch, perhaps in risk perception, and from us we are insiders. We have been in the country and throughout Latin America working. We have historically low levels of NPL. So as we understand the risk, sometimes outside investors do not see it the same. But I think that's perfectly explainable. Any new market requires track record, success stories. So that needs some time to permeate. So I think the risk perceptions are different. So the role for DFIs for that, I think there's so much money that's needed or investment from the private sector that governments and DFIs cannot really have an important role in providing that money. We have to be more facilitators of that. And I think that's the right way to do it, just to lower the perception of risk, demonstration effects of this works, this doesn't work. So we have a role to play there. Things that obviously that we help catalyze such investments, innovative financial instruments like green bonds, innovative risk structures. One that we're using in the context of funds is blended finance. Blended finance, whatever you may say of that product, has been really successful for us in the context of funds. We have seen this as a transitory mechanism that allows to bridge that mismatch in perceptions for a business that should not be subsidized, that should be priced in the market on market terms and attracted to private investors. The blended finance can get you over that hump, do that demonstration effect with very specific pilots. So that is a very important project, type of investment for us. In funds, we use blended finance in two ways. The first one is the traditional first loss. So really simple, absorbs first losses, so investors take a lower piece of the risk, and so you can convince investors not all that familiar with the sector or the country or the innovative climate investments that need to be made. So you support somehow and let this play out as a success story, hoping that the next one won't need that type of support. That's the first thing that we do. We've done it across the region in funds in Brazil and funds, regional funds investing in Brazil, quite successfully on the climate space. The other way we use blended is to align fund managers with certain, for instance, climate objectives. So we put, through blended finance, we put economic incentives in a fund to achieve certain goals in climate. Can be emissions, lower emissions, energy efficiency. So the manager, the fund manager, gets some type of economic benefit. Obviously, that helps align the investment process with a climate focus. A fund is a common vehicle with other investors, so all investors have to be in accordance with this, but has worked quite successfully for us. So there's several mechanisms to do. Again, what I'm trying to say is that we cannot solve the crisis. We can somehow demonstrate what works and try to make it mainstream.
Perfect. And just a follow-up question here. You have been very interested in nature-based solutions in the Amazon. How is the framework that you are, what are the kind of investments that you would love to invest related to this?
First, it depends what bucket you're using. From my private sector bucket, we have to make investments that earn a return according to the risk. So we need to find a way to do good business. And that have several reasons, but we feel that those investments become sustainable and other investors have to participate there. So because we don't go more than 20% in the fund, so we need other investors. So this has to work on private market terms. Having said that, a very emerging geography as the Amazon, it's a difficult order. So I can say that we're looking a lot into two areas, technical assistances to try to get those projects ready for financing. I should say as a side note, there are projects, but there are not enough projects at scale at a significant level of being ready to receive private financing. So we try to work on the development side, and the blended finance will help us also get those investors. This is a work in progress, but we see tremendous potential. The Amazonia region, which is 5 countries, actually Brazil is the largest, really is so important for the world, and you have so much business related to nature, not only nature-based solutions, but nature-based businesses also, that not only affect the environment, but the populations living there. So we see this as a key aspect for us.
Perfect. Samar, now you had time to answer Jeremy's question. Additionally to the points, I wanted to maybe if you can explain a little bit about the EcoInvest plan and how we can use. I think it's a mechanism that's quite interesting where we can use IDB, for instance, rating to analyze our project, and how these kind of mechanisms. What else have you been seeing in the world, and how can we help countries as Brazil to get a better rating?
Okay. Let me start a little bit with Jeremy's. I was thinking with my previous hat, we looked sometime. I was at the IMF many years ago, and it's interesting to look at the sovereign balance sheet, and then you can put a lot of these assets into it. But that's in a way theoretical. It's very difficult to quantify. It's a great exercise, but when you're looking at credit risk, it's a lot more specific, it's a lot narrower. But a shout out to all the graduate students in the room. A very interesting area for research is how to actually build a broader balance sheet for the country, where you can take account of all of these things. It's fascinating. But that's not the credit risk we're assessing. I mean, that's what a rating agency does. It's how are you going to be able to repay the debt you're taking? And that's ultimately our role, right? So it's a different view of the assets and liability. Admitted much narrower, but that's a different mandate. So credit risk is not the economy. It's very precise. So on that, we'll come back. No, I'm happy to keep going on this, but I want to get back to your question. And where you described that you start from, if you will, the world. And of course, Brazil has enormous wealth in nature, in human capital, in size. It's a G10 country, not in terms of size. It's the top 10. I mean, you can go on and on about that, right? There is no disputing these attributes. But then you have to go back down to the project level. So how do you translate all of this to actual, quote-unquote, money on the table, and then product that goes out on the market, and then all of that? So it's a very long way. And it goes through regulation, it goes through macroeconomic stability, it goes through cost of funding, it goes through a whole host of risks, political, geopolitical. I mean, you can go on. I mean, but just the point is that it's true, you have to see the big picture, and there is opportunity, which you all highlighted, but concretely, there is a long way to go. So you asked specifically about the IDB Invest. I'm not the one to speak about it. It's not my area, but it's a tool that really helps deal with one of the many issues that bring us from the, 6,000 feet to down to earth, as it were. And at some point, we can talk about the challenges, but I'll leave that. But one of the key issues, if you will, is exchange rate volatility. The cost of funding, let's make it a little bit broader. Brazil has very high interest rates. Talking about, people or investors domestically, that's one area. For foreign investors, okay, they can raise funds abroad at different costs, but the cost of the hedging cost is very high. So one instrument that I think the IDB has been pioneered there in Brazil is to provide, if you will, a more cost-effective way of hedging exchange rate risk. And this is something I'm sure you can talk about even more. You heard a lot from investors that it's a big risk to take in Brazil. So the way it works is that given that an IDB is a triple-rated entity, the World Bank, all of the MDBs that are at that scale, first of all, they have their own hedging tools. They can protect themselves when they take risk in local currency or in domestic markets. They have very diversified investor base. If they want to hedge, they hedge at very, very low cost. And through the central bank and a government program, qualified projects that are really targeting renewables and energy transition and all of that are kind of eligible to benefit from that, call it subsidized hedging cost. and I'm very simple representation because I'm not the designer of this project, but just to tell you that this is one mechanism that I think is helpful for some of these issues.
Okay, very good. Jeremy, you had a point on that? Do you want to?
Of course, I agree with you as someone who was at the IMF and the World Bank, so I recognize the point that you're making. What I would say is that the reason that at the end of the day, many of the, if you will, the natural assets of Brazil are theoretically on the balance sheet but don't translate into credit ratings is that we have not yet, as a world, actually decided that it's worth paying Brazil for the services that its nature-based assets provide. And we don't do it through the Article 6 mechanism, and the creation not just of voluntary carbon markets, but I think ultimately of forms of linked international compliance or government-to-government carbon and nature markets. And if we're serious about the, if you will, creating incentives that are appropriate to actually encourage countries and communities to manage those assets well, then we have to change that. And I think we would be in violent agreement on that. And if we change that, then those assets will become valuable and they'll end up being, if you will, directly influencing the potential creditworthiness of...
Yeah, the way you're putting is that how you can monetize that asset.
In the end.
In the end, how you turn that into financial flows into the government, if we're talking about the sovereign risk, for example, into the quote-unquote balance sheet of the government. Like this is income coming in versus debt being built up and all of that.
And I think one of the reasons that some of us put such a weight on this is because we do see that if in fact we can, if you will, monetize the value of the natural capital, not only does it, if you will, create appropriate incentives to, if you will, manage those estates well, but by changing sovereign credit risk ratings, right, which it has the potential to do, and bringing down the cost of international debt, it transforms the potential of many countries in the global south, right, in terms of their capacity to invest in the energy transition. And many of those countries don't have, if you will, the clean energy matrix that Brazil has. So this is an area where it's central, if you will, to the transition that we need to see internationally and in, if you will, in some of the major, if you will, emerging markets. The one other observation I would make is that while those things are, you know, kind of now, I think, actually on the agenda, and I think COP30 presents an extraordinary opportunity to bring climate and nature and these financing mechanisms together in a meaningful way that feeds all the way to sovereign, if you will, debt rating. It also matters, and this is to your point about barriers, Luciana, in the end, those sovereign debt ratings also relate to institutional quality, right? They are central. So Brazil could get a ton of money and waste it, right? And it could get a lot of money and manage that money extremely well. And the difference between those two things and that institutional quality goes right to the heart of your question about barriers.
And by the way, we have been very active while the G20 is being hosted by Brazil, and I have been the chair of finance infrastructure on the B20, and this is one of the key topics that we have been discussing, not only for Brazil, but to the entire Global South. Jeremy, on the challenges, you guys have been very close to the government and the agendas that the government have been proposing. What are the main, besides what we have just talked, but what are the main agendas that you see that need to evolve so that we have in Brazil a very interesting environment for international investors to play? Based on your experience with your discussions with the government, with the ecological plan, what's next?
I think it always comes down to, you know, two really simple points. And they're simple to say, and they're very hard to do, right? So one is to provide clear policy signals that actually, if you will, offer the market a direction which they can rely on and becomes the basis of long-term investment. And it's not just to go as policy signal for now and it's going to change tomorrow. It needs to be embedded in an institutional framework that gives the Macquaries of the world the confidence to be able to bet long, right? This is a long-term game. This is not about, moving the volatile policies. So it is the policy plus the institutional, if you will, anchoring that creates the signal that allows for long-term capital to flow. So that is number one, and it's not there yet, right, in enough parts of, if you will, the economy. And it's not unique to Brazil, by the way. I live in a country, the UK, where it may seem like, it's an advanced economy, but it's all over the map, right? And the second thing is to, if you'll make it easy to do business, right? And it is, if you have really high transaction costs, right down to the project level, right, where everything takes longer than it should, and it's harder, and in a 10% cost of capital economy, you lose a year or 2 years because the permitting or the local planning, all these things that may be multiple years, it makes these projects economically unviable. So it is that macro policy signal anchored, it is the micro capacity to actually get the different institutions, and I know it's hard in every single country. And I don't know that Brazil is so much worse than others, but when you're trying to change the signal in the world about what Brazil stands for as a potential country that's going to go from 2.5% growth a year to 4 or 5, showing that there are cases where you can actually get things done well, fast, and efficiently will make an enormous difference. What are the top 5 cases that will be the proof points for Macquarie to come in and go, I'm really going to invest even more in that country because I can get stuff done?
Yeah. By the way, I would like to
I think this is, right along the lines of, from an institutional point of view, where we have our balance sheet, as I said, we are very bullish LATAM, very bullish energy transition, so we can allocate those funds, right? But our balance sheet only goes so far. And so the key to this, in the conversation internally is on the asset management side. We have been working for some time raising a fund that will be either Brazil-specific or Latin America-specific. And I don't think this is just Macquarie's experience overall. I have talked to other colleagues in global infrastructure funds, et cetera. And we all face the same challenge, which is that because of some of the views shared on the sovereign and, just the rating overall, right? And your first point regarding, the policies, the institutions, LPs are not at this time willing to put, 100% of their resources, long-term money that they're managing with, 10-year plus horizon into a jurisdiction where there isn't quite yet enough comfort. So the way that we have been able to allocate capital into Brazil from an institutional perspective is that we raise mega funds on a global basis, and they have up to a certain percentage that can be invested outside of the developed world, and those are the pockets of money that we are allocating to this opportunity that we're very bullish on, which is Brazil, right? But I think that we are really going to see progress once on the asset management side we are able to raise a specific fund for the specific opportunity, and quite frankly, in these conversations with LPs, one of the things is political risk, right? And the possibility of having, a very left-wing or very radical party come in, and there isn't enough belief that the institutions that go beyond, government to government will be sturdy enough to sustain these types of long-term investments. So I think that is where the current administration, along with, where the current administration, along with the institutional powers that be, can work on to give more comfort that that these things are not going to swing from, from party to party or election to election. And my comment, and where I wanted to add, right, regarding the balance sheet and can we really value it or not, all of these changes have to happen so that those opportunities and those resources can be really monetized. But I think that unfortunately, you're very right that it all comes down to the project level. So we need, the institutional framework, and we need the ability to have the projects be done in a manner such that the capital comes in so that we can monetize those natural resources. So it's actually kind of circular in a way, but it needs to start with setting the right framework in our view so that we can then allocate more resources.
Makes sense. Samar, do you want to comment on that? You were...
No, I think one of them, to me, over the years, the most interesting and difficult and question that everybody asks, policy reversal, which is exactly what you're talking about. How do we know that this is not going to change? And you mentioned the regulatory environment. So that's why it's a question of staying the course. It's long term. It's building the credibility of different of the institute. I mean, you know, we can talk about specifically on the rating, and one of the key factors that we look at is institutional strength. And political risk comes under our, event risk or external, like shocks. So these are all play a role, and that takes time. And I think if you talk about this government, there is a lot, the ecological transformation plan, there is the new taxonomy, there are all these measures. But I think, as you point out, people are not yet sure, or investors are not yet sure if this is durable. Because remember, the potential for Brazil had the cleanest energy matrix not yesterday, not today. It's been there for a while. The Amazon is there for a while. The opportunity is there. But 2 years ago, nobody was talking about prioritizing that, right? The prior, so having swings with different administrations is something that complicates some of these investments, right?
Andreas, from your perspective, you were talking about blended finance, about the mechanisms that you guys have been using. At the end of the day, one of the main roles that IDB has is to mobilize private capital into the region. What are the challenges that you are facing, and how were you able to overcome those challenges so far? What's your plans for the future?
Sure. And let me just say that I agree with what was said here. From the top down, the macro, all the environment for investments, for investors is extremely important. The enabling environment, meaning, as we call it, meaning the ease of doing business and the condition stability, all of that is important and has to be ever improving everywhere. So that's a condition, but it's a sufficient condition? No. One of the main things we also see is that there's not enough. Let me backtrack. I hope we could have a map to say if we fix all of this, the money will come. This is not an easy problem. There's not a secret sauce, as I say. And we have to experiment as a country, as investors, as fund managers. So let me just say there's not enough investable projects. I'm not only speaking about the major infrastructure projects. Going down the line, things that you also need, and you have all types of funds that invest in the larger ones and the small ones. So if we limit ourselves to funds, it's a really simple decision. An investor, it can be a large institutional investor or a smaller one, looks at the fund. First, they want to see, is their track record doing this successfully? Obviously, with climate and newer initiatives, that's harder to show. And second, are there projects for this fund to invest? All investors have stories where they commit to a fund that doesn't invest in a few years, and so that hits your return. So institutional investors, and not only those that manage pension funds or money from the public, have to protect that money. So we have to see that also from that perspective. For us, what we do, I think we vote with our feet. We enter into a transaction, taking a larger piece of the risk, hoping we have good partners that are investors that invest with us, and hoping that by us putting ourselves there, that will attract them, and that works up to a level. In funds, we do exactly the same thing. We try to be an anchor investor. I think that gives some sort of comfort we are sort of an honest broker, I would like to say. So that gives some sort of comfort to larger investors or to other investors, but it's not foolproof. It is not an easy task to raise a fund or to mobilize money. We have been very successful lately, but there's a lot that needs to be done.
Okay. We don't have a lot of time, so my last question to all of you. Brazil has done a ton of work in the last years towards becoming a hub of solutions for climate transition. We are this year the host of G20. Many of the discussions we are having here were discussed in the environment of G20 and B20. Many solutions and proposals have arrived from there. And next year, we are going to be the host of COP30. That's a very relevant moment. The COP per se is very relevant based on the issues that are going to be discussed, and it's going to happen in Brazil, close to the forest. What's your 2 cents recommendation on what Brazil should do to really accelerate and boost the process of being a hub for climate solutions? What's your take? What's your suggestion to Brazil? Whoever want to start.
Start with the obvious and rather boring things. The risk premium on Brazil is relatively high. And that's what you're trying to say at the beginning. The rating is lower, so you have higher costs. So it speaks to the risk premium at the end of the day. It's not only, in a way, it's the chicken and egg problem. You have to build the credibility of, or what is needed is to build the credibility of the long term. And I would mention fiscal sustainability. To that, then you have lower risk premium. So then it sets a stage, right? That is the biggest constraint right now from a credit perspective, because growth has improved a lot. You have talked about the opportunity. If I hear you talking, I think there's just like money that is willing and would like to invest, but projects are not always there, and there are all these other problems. So there may be some tools, some measures that could be done to attract that on the macro side.
Thank you.
I can go. I would say public-private partnership. Both have an extraordinary, very important role to play. Consultation between those two is extremely important. Governments and other public sector actors, such as DFIs, as I was saying before, need to be able to show and try to push that enabling environment, that proper environment. But the private sector needs to invest. So you have to ask what they want, and vice versa. I think a lot more dialogue and consultation is necessary. And it's not an easy matter, but I think it goes that way.
Thank you very much.
All right, I'll give you the final word. So I think we're all in a sense in violent agreement. The one thing I'd add to this is you've got to have proof points, right? I mean, really concrete examples of projects that are now getting done, as opposed to projects that we keep on talking about, of specific, if you will, progress on 1 or 2 clusters, right? I happen to think the bio-SAF economy is one that is hugely important and where Brazil has an advantage. What would it mean to bring the pieces of that? You talk about public-private partnership. We need the off-takers in there. We need a number of... What are the 1 or 2 places where we could actually make progress over the next 12, 18 months? Could we imagine for a moment that Brazil begins to seed something like a green version of NASDAQ, right? For smaller, innovative nature.
I like this one.
But so how do we create a small number of things, not 100 things, but a small number of things that are very clear proof points that all these fine words translate into highly specific action that taps into the real resource that I don't think we've talked enough about in this conversation, which is, I think, a very entrepreneurial, capable, if you will, population with significant domestic capital, right? I mean, this is not a country that only needs to play with international capital. I know it matters, but how do we mobilize the young, educated, entrepreneurial population and actually, the green NASDAQ example is one, but make some of that begin to happen, right? And I think if we do that, right, then we shift, if you will, the confidence and some of the real perceptions out there.
Yeah, I think just to finish it up, we have worked in financing many different infrastructure projects in let's call it lesser credit-worthy countries. And the reason some of those have been very successful is because the administration took a very, proactive and focused approach to say, a little bit similar to what you said, right? What is it that we're going to focus on, and then create the right framework in order to bring, whether that be some sort of subsidies if needed, which will then be offset by the revenues that will come through from that specific sector. But I think if the government takes a very specific approach, a narrow approach to develop, one or two strategic sectors, and works together under PPPs, because that's actually what we've seen in other countries where they have developed certain type of strategic infrastructure. That has worked really well for other countries, much smaller. They've been able to figure it out. So, I mean, I don't see any reason why, in Brazil, given that it's much more advanced on a number of different fronts with much more liquid capital domestic markets, something like that couldn't work. But you need to land it, and you need to narrow the focus instead of having so many broad conversations up here, to be able to attack maybe one area or two strategic areas.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you all for the contribution here, and hope to see you next year in the same place here with better news. So, thank you very much. Let me ask Marina and Jorge to join me here. Pode ser? Tá bom. So,
Esperar o pessoal. Quer passar? Eu vou me... So moving on, we wanted to share with you some news and some evolutions of the Brazil Climate Summit. So we are going to share this moment with you. So when we were planning this event, we thought that would be important to share why we created the Brazil Climate Summit and where do we want to go in the future, especially considering a very incredible audience with a lot of international participants and many people that we are meeting for the first time. The Brazil Climate Summit started from a point of discomfort that many Brazilians, many individuals that were working with investments, with climate solutions, were feeling. And we were provoked by Luciana, the mother of the Brazil Climate Summit, to do something about it. Our feeling and our shared view was, we don't have time to waste in tackling the climate crisis. Brazil already has multiple solutions that are available right now, and we can offer to the world and to companies. But at the same time that we have all this potential, we understood that we are not good on communicating our climate solutions as private sector, and we are not participating of many of decision-making tables. So we are not participating, for example, in tables that are discussing the methodologies of carbon credits or the tech roots of SAF. So we realized that if you wanted to do something, we need first to communicate, and second, to foster and build bridges and spaces of dialogue. As we are doers, this feeling was so intense inside us that we made the decision to start as individuals in a voluntary basis, an initiative, even that it was a small step. So the small step that we took 3 years ago was to organize a first event to test, to check if it would resonate with the international community and also with the Brazilian, this idea of positioning Brazil as a climate hub and to start open space for dialogue and collaboration. So the first edition of the Brazil Climate Summit happened in 2022. Here, we were very successful, and it led to a second edition, much more mature, last year, in which we attract much more attention of the international community. We show that we are eager to do business, that we are seeking investments in Brazil, and that we want to collaborate. This success led to an even higher ambition and motivation that took us here today to this point, and that we have many exciting new steps ahead of us. Jorge.
Thanks, Marina. So adding a few steps in this journey, if you can move on. In May this year, we wanted to build this global platform, and as global as New York can be, if you want to be global, you really have to go elsewhere. So we held an event in Paris in May this year, which was really interesting to understand the differences, the stark differences between American and European stakeholders, and the differences between what they thought about Brazil in the climate space and their priorities and how we are perceived there versus how we are perceived here. And then here we are today in our third edition, and this year those of you who have been here in the last 2 years, you probably noticed some difference. First one, I think the one thing that we invested most time this year was to invite the American and the local audience. And we're very happy that the first time we have a 50-50 balance between Brazilians and Americans and other nationalities, because this was our aim at the very beginning, right? To have a 50-50 split so that it really becomes a dialogue. The second change we did this year was to make it a little bit more pragmatic in terms of networking. You're having more time to network, and we hired a matchmaking company. Some of you have experienced that. It's happening downstairs. We had more than 100 meetings, like one-on-one meetings between yourselves. The third thing, we held this closed space sessions upstairs on specific topics where we had companies pitching specific business cases. And the last thing is that we realized also how important it is to listen to the international audience. So we are having more space, more time to have foreign, so American investors, American companies, global companies talking to us, so that we also understand. So it's not only about talking, it's also about listening. And the next chapter leads us to Abu Dhabi. So we are organizing an event on April 23rd and 24th. Abu Dhabi, the Middle East, is of course a new hub. It's an emerging hub on the climate space. And we want to have that conversation with the Middle Eastern colleagues and stakeholders to get more input and also promote Brazil, understand how we can connect to their priorities. And then the next steps I'll leave to Luciana.
We don't think that that's enough, honestly. We have been doing events. I think we are building the dialogue. But we strongly believe, and we said that the first time we were here with you in the first edition, we talked about a movement, because we think that more than events, it's not enough to come here to New York in September, we meet people, we talk about Brazil, we talk about things that we understand that can be hubs of solutions, we talk about how we can contribute to decarbonizing the economies, but it's not just September, we need to keep going. So the idea here is to bring the Brazil Climate Summit in something bigger. We are launching today the Brazil Climate Institute that has as its ambition to unleash Brazil's potential. And most important is to team up with global players. Our idea here is to more and more have international audience and discuss with international players, with investors, with other companies, with entrepreneurs, how we can really create this hub of solutions through Brazil, partnering up. We don't believe that Brazil is going to do anything alone, nor the US, nor the Middle East, nor anyone. So we have to partner up, and we are launching the Brazil Climate Institute with this idea of building bridges. Next year, it's a very important year. We are going to have COP30. It's going to be a relevant year to showcase what Brazil has in its potential, how it can contribute to the world. And again, we are creating the bridges. We are trying to create the bridges, but more than the bridges, we want to walk the bridges with all of you. So we need to walk together so that we have a better future and we can help Brazil collaborate with the transition. Thank you very much.